Good afternoon, everyone. I believe we are live at the Spirituality and Practice page on Facebook. My name is John M. Sweeney. I review most of the books here, and I am here with Chelan Harkin, mystical poet and author from the Pacific Northwest. Chelan's latest book is this one, which we are going to talk about, and many other things. But welcome, Chelan, and thanks for being here.
Thanks so much, John. This is really fun.
I was delighted that you could join us. You have a very lively online presence, I know. You are, for some of us who have been around longer anyway, you are one of those writers who I'm going to speak collectively for people my age, admire because you find readers in ways that are emerging and creative and fascinating. I know you have a very active Facebook community. I've seen you thank them in the acknowledgments of your books, and I've participated on your page a little bit, and I love how you find readers, and I hope a lot of them are here with us now.
Yes. How do you mean how I find readers, John?
Well, the old style way is that you publish a book and it's in a bookstore, or I guess it's on Amazon, and someone might recommend it, or someone like me might review it. I reviewed your latest book that we're going to talk about at Spirituality and Practice. But those are really old ways of finding readers today. It's much more interesting, I think, in the creative, almost sort of more inspired, spirit-led kinds of ways of finding readers today, in the ether. You put poems out there and people find them. For instance, so I'll tell you how I found you.
Sure. I'd love to hear.
I feel like I came to you late. I only found you a few months ago, and I found you because I was having coffee with a rabbi friend here in Milwaukee, where I live, and he pulled out his phone and he said, "I've got to read you this poem." And he read me this poem, and I said, "Oh, wow, I love that." And who's that by? And he said, "Well, I think her name is Chelan Harkin." And he was reading it on his phone. And I said, "Where'd you find it?" And he said, "I just find them online. I have a friend who sends them to me, and then they get sent to me by congregants of mine. And sometimes I go look for them because she writes new ones all the time." And then he pulled out your book, and it was in his bag. And I have several rabbi friends because I'm married to a rabbi, but this particular rabbi friend is someone who I wouldn't have expected to be reading poems like yours. He's someone who comes from a very sort of classical education. I would have thought him to be more of an old library kind of a guy,
Wow.
But I think he has a love for mystical poets. He has a love of Rumi and Hafiz, and I know you have a love for all those classics too. So anyway, that's my story of how I found you.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing, because there's a surreal element. There's been a very surreal element to this whole process. It's been such a wild story, and also just because so much of my interactions are on Facebook just through type. When I hear stories like the one you just shared, it just the really amazing, this amazing journey just kind of connects at a deeper level. I just feel so delighted. Thanks for sharing.
I figured that you get that all the time. Really, I thought maybe that's why I was kind of slow in telling my story there a few minutes ago, because I feel like you must hear this all the time. You've got 8,000 people on Facebook, and you're putting stuff up there all the time. And like, I was just yesterday watching your post about tapping into your masculinity, and it's wonderful. It's fascinating. And there are people who are leaving all kinds of comments and things, which I realize kind of normal Facebook stuff. But I was thinking that you must get messages all the time.
That's true. I do. But the in-person connections are really special when there's a little bit more feedback, when it's more clear that it's coming from a person, because when it's all through type, it can feel a bit removed. So it's really, now and then I run in, this one's extra kind of trippy, to run into people in my little hometown and really in person. And because all of this began in 2020, so I've really been so pretty stationed at home for a lot of this. So it's there's been an element that's been kind of surreal. So when I do see people or have interviews, it's really sweet. It's really sweet to hear that. And it's really sweet to hear what you shared about this rabbi who you would have assumed maybe was into more, I forget what you said, more classical literature, or resonating. It's just fun. I just couldn't be more honored to find points of resonance in sometimes unexpected places.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this friend of mine is a guy with a lot of fancy degrees, and a big library of traditional volumes. And I didn't expect him to be reading me a poem on his phone that he had found online. It's just, and so when he did, I thought, oh my goodness, like, I mean, everybody's doing this now. It's not just me. I mean, I feel like I'm now creative because I'm reading things on my phone that I found online, but even this, so, I mean, this is the new world we're in. And, it leads me to say, by the way, something else that I have liked about you from afar, because you and I just really met for the first time a few minutes ago before we went live, is that I've done a lot of these conversations with people, with authors, and some of them are, very well-known authors who have been around a long time. And I love the fact that when you and I scheduled this, whatever it was, 8 weeks ago, you didn't ask me, what questions are you going to ask? How should I prepare for this? I mean, I love that because it was clear that you do this kind of thing in a way that I feel like you do your poems. You are led by inspiration, aren't you? You really are. I mean, you don't just like make it up when you write poems.
No, I really am. I really am led by inspiration, and I'm so grateful for that. It feels just like a tremendous gift. I'm not led by that all the time, but in these sorts of, that's my intention too, in spaces like this. And I do like, there's an excitement in just showing up without too much of the cognitive pre-established ideas of how it's going to go. It feels more alive and connective and exciting. Yeah.
It does. Well, anyway, I appreciate that.
Yeah. Thank you.
I don't appreciate it simply I don't appreciate it because you were making my life easy. I appreciate it because I find it interesting too. So I should take a step back and I should say to our audience, which is made up of people on different continents and from all over the United States and North America, people who are familiar with spiritualityandpractice.com. Thank you for being here. People who are, I'm sure, have come here from Chelan Harkin's Facebook page. Thank you for being here. All of you, we are going to have a conversation for another, 20 minutes or whatever. And then I'm going to start looking at the questions that are being fed to me that you are typing in the chat. And I will field your questions to Chelan. So that's the plan. And then I'm going to sort of promise to Chelan, that we'll get you out of here before the top of the next hour, So we'll be done by 10 minutes till or something like that. So Anyway, we are here with Chelan Harkin. We are talking about Let Us Dance, the stumble and whirl with the beloved, which I will also mention in the new world of books, as opposed to the old world, is self-published. And I know that that's part of your entrance into the world of mystical poetry, your world of communicating, spirit and creativity to the world. The way that you enter the world has involved bringing these books on your own, through your own efforts. And you have found a really big audience in doing so. I mean, can you tell us about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really happy to, because I had really written off. I'd never even considered self-publishing because I thought I had this idea of investing a ton of money and having a whole bunch of boxes of my books getting dusty in my basement because I didn't know what to do with them. And I didn't want that for my process. So I just put off really publishing for about more than a decade, because I also had no idea how to move forward with trying to connect with a publisher. It just felt like it was out of my level of understanding to be able to activate that goal, that deep dream to publish. And then I connected with a woman who had had a lot of success self-publishing. And right at the time when I was really finally claiming my readiness to share my poetry with the world. And she told me some wonderful things. She told me how affordable it is to self-publish, how easy it is to put a book together, and how on most platforms it's print on demand anymore. So you don't need to do that upfront investment. And so that just got me so excited. And I could not be more grateful to have just taken charge of my own process and not waited for some really, to not have given the power of my process to the hope that maybe somebody would discover me and all of that, which I had been doing, and to just get moving on that. And then I was unbelievably fortunate, because a few days before I published my first book of poetry, Susceptible to Light, I wrote a poem called The Worst Thing We Ever Did. And I almost didn't post it on Facebook because it makes some pretty kind of authoritative assertions, and I wasn't sure if I had that right. And I was nervous to share that one, but I did anyway. And it went viral. It went crazy viral. It was shared at least 50,000 times just on Facebook alone. And who knows about all the other spaces and platforms. And so then I just, because with self-published books, you can just go ahead and add another one right before you publish it. So I put that one in, and then it just got my book so much attention. And that single poem really changed my whole life. And then another thing I did, you mentioned just how I find readers. I just did a completely random, frenetic adding campaign of I just maxed out my audience on Facebook. You can have 5,000 people, and I don't even know. So I've got all this wonderful community, and it was just randomly added by me. But it's such an amazing thing. It's a great. We have a lot of great resources to be able to do things like this and really reach a global audience. And anyway, it's been such an incredible delight. And I also love that that self-publishing and then finding a publisher, they're not mutually exclusive, and that one can really lead to the other. And so if anyone's considering that, I just couldn't encourage it more. It's such a wonderful, at least, starting point. But yeah.
Well, I agree with you. As someone who has worked in traditional publishing for 30 years, 30 years ago, I felt completely differently about self-publishing than I do today, or than I have the last 5 to 10 years. It has become such a wonderful path for so many people.
Yeah, no, it really is. And the books look great too. They don't look second class. They're good.
Yep.
They're good. Yeah.
They do.
Yep.
Now, I don't want to go too far into our conversation until you read a couple of poems. And I will admit that this morning, as I was sort of preparing for our conversation, I was thinking to myself that I was going to read. But I'm not going to, because I have now realized that would be selfish. No one wants to hear me read your poems. They want to hear But can I ask that you read The Audacious Goal, which is the first one in this book, and I just love it. So that's the extent of my selfishness, is that I'm asking if you would read that one.
It would be a pleasure. It's really fun to hear the different poems that speak to different people. So this is from my book, Let Us Dance, The Stumbling World with the Beloved. And this whole book was kind of an audacious goal. It was an experiment in kind of pushing the bounds of boldness in expression. And it was such a fun and kind of felt like kind of a fiery book in some ways to write. So here's the audacious goal. My poetry has the audacious goal to take your breath away, that you might stop, even for that moment, taking it for granted and want it back. My poetry has the audacious goal to stop you in the tracks of your busy life, even briefly, and help you fall from your unstable worship of cerebral gods back into the soft bed of your heart. My poetry has the audacious goal to remind you, if only for a breath, that there's loveliness built into you that's more intimate and essential than even your DNA. And my poetry has the audacious goal of inviting itself into you to ring that bell of remembrance. My poetry desires to be a sacred interruption, to remove the veil, if only for a glimpse, that you may consider how perfectly set the jewel of our earth is in relation to the golden amulet of the sun, and the similar relationship between our hearts and God. My poetry has the audacious goal to grab a handful of God, and if only for an instant, gift that back to your heart.
I love it. Thank you very much. The helping me fall from my unstable worship of cerebral gods back into the soft bed of my heart. Those are a few lines for me, I think.
Thank you. Yeah, sometimes it is just a couple lines that really get you in a poem, huh?
Yeah, and I'm also going to take sort of a step back now, which is to say that after that friend of mine read me a poem of yours on his phone, I then went home and ordered the book. And when the book arrived, I looked at it, I read it, and I immediately felt the presence of poets like Rumi and Hafiz and Daniel Ladinsky, who is someone who I have had great affection for 30 years or so. And I'm sure he doesn't remember, but he and I corresponded a little bit a long time ago when I worked for a little publishing house in Vermont. There was a project that involved him. And but even I felt his inspiration. I felt his inspiration in not only some of the images, but even just sort of the way the lines are crafted. Am I making that up, or can you say anything about that?
I'm so glad you asked, because this is the coolest story. And so, yes, absolutely. Hafez poems as Daniel Ladinsky poems, inspired by Hafez, really, we should say, are my primary poetic inspiration. And I was first introduced to them at age 17 in a therapy session. And therapy I hadn't been making much headway. I felt just so blocked, and I just had no idea how to open this heart at all. And my therapist one day read me this short poem by Daniel. You don't have to act crazy anymore. We all know you were good at that. And there's more. And it was this unbelievable experience. It was so profound and wild. It was because all of the walls are in my heart unlocked just for the duration of the poem. But in that moment, my consciousness was able to make contact with and remember the possibility of feeling an energy of aliveness in me that I'd been very disconnected from. And it was astonishing. And also it was kind of a destiny moment as well. It was, oh my God, what is this? And whatever this is, because I didn't even have the language at that time to categorize it as a mystical poem. I didn't know really what that meant, but I knew whatever that was, I was absolutely, without a doubt, meant to do it. Yeah. And so then fast forward to 2020, end of 2020, and something had finally clicked that to not publish my book would become detrimental, actually, to my health and well-being. It was such an essential necessity of my soul and my overall wellness that it couldn't be ignored anymore. And so I bought a couple of Daniel Ladinsky books, Hafez books, and to get some inspiration and to get some inspiration for formatting. So you're right. There's a similarity in the way I laid it out. And I was so inspired that I decided to do a little prayer experiment where every night I would walk around my block, because I didn't know the first thing about publishing anything. And I prayed to my favorite dead poet, and I just asked Hafez for help, for marketing help, and for inspiration. And so much inspiration started flowing that about a third of the poems in this book were from that time. It was crazy. And then I just, thought it doesn't hurt to give it a shot. I'm going to just keep asking my favorite Dead Poet for marketing help. And then 3 weeks into this publishing journey, this was unreal because I had no connections in the publishing world. I had no connections of this sort at all. And I got an email out of the blue from Daniel Ladinsky.
Really? Wow.
Yes, out of nowhere, and it blew my mind. And it would have blown my mind anyway, of course, but the fact that I had been specifically saying this pointed prayer to Hafez was just nuts. And then Daniel and I told him this whole story, and he told me he'd been really wanting to connect with a young poet because he had a book idea of a shared poetic letters back and forth. So then he said, "You want to write a book with me?" And that was insane. And he ended up writing the foreword for my first book, and he introduced me to all kinds of publishing houses and resources. It was wild. So that's my story, my connection there with Hafez poetry. And I'll say this too, just to wind up, that poetry really gave me permission to play with the concept of God, which is really and in my own personal life and in my poetry to be willing to experiment with moving outside of the bounds of conditioned thought about God kind of being stern, conditional, and scary. It was a bit of my at least unconscious idea that I held and projected onto God. And to think of God as an intimate force, or, that there's just the possibility for such close and profound, joyful love in this world that is, that really embraces our wholeness and our truth and our messy struggles as people, as well as our great beauty. And so that was huge and fundamental in my life and in my writing.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yours is very much a poetry of the heart.
Mm.
And I mean heart in so many ways.
Mm.
And I know you mean it in so many ways. And so I guess I'm saying that and then asking you, what do you think what is the heart? And it's an image that appears again and again in your poetry, as do others.
Mm.
Images of spirit and of consciousness and of learning and beauty. But heart is there again and again.
Yeah.
What is it? What is heart?
What a cool question. Thank you for asking. So, well, I would say, and there are a lot of challenges in our maybe humanity's current level of development and understanding of things. And there are a lot of relational challenges in really, really opening the heart and really, truly feeling the tone of love kind of move through us in a more experiential way, which is something I always really yearned for and felt frustrated about, really wanting, kind of feeling like I needed that and not knowing how to access that. And so what inherently connected for me in talking about the heart is talking about relationship with pain, because the reason we don't open our hearts for a good reason, because there is one of the first things that we feel when we do is a lot of pain, actually. And so really for me, my journey in opening the heart and in connecting with maybe a dimension perhaps, or quality of reality that I more of a mystical quality, or you could say a spiritual dimension, it's just hand in hand with opening the heart, encountering all this old, human pain in there, and tending to it and moving through it with love and transmuting really that old grief into generative inspiration and joy. And then through that passage of that process, wow, it just feels like a portal into love, but not a love that transcends human struggle, but that can move toward it with compassion, but also stay steady in a more in a way that doesn't become those problems, but can be a source of yeah, just compassion and empathy in a broader and broader way as we move through more and more of all of this that we hold inside of ourselves. That makes sense.
No, it does. It does.
Yeah.
It makes me think of something else I wanted to ask, which is,
yeah.
you're a poet who talks a lot about spirit and consciousness and heart, and some of these are mystical concepts and ideas, and by that often we mean sort of indescribable, inscrutable ideas, and but you're very rooted still in your surroundings, and when you talk about heart, you're talking about your own heart often. I mean, the reader can feel that, I think. So all of that is preamble for me to say, what would I know about you if I was your neighbor in the town where you live? You live in Washington State, right? So if I lived around the corner and I bumped into you, you know, when you're taking out the trash or whatever, I mean, what would I know about you? I know from the preface to your book that you have a husband and a couple of great children. So I mean, I know that much. But just what should your readers know about where you're planted on the planet?
Just kind of, do you mean kind of more about what my day-to-day is like? Is that kind of what you mean? Or
well, see, the interesting thing is with a writer like you, with a poet, a mystical poet, there's a way in which it's almost improper to ask the kind of question I'm asking. Like,
no, it's all good.
You know, tell me, you know, what state you live in and who you're married to, and if you are, and you know, where you come from and where you buy your groceries and things seem so mundane and unrelated to the beautiful things that we're talking about. But yet it is related, I think, in your poems. And I think your readers feel that.
Cool. Yes. So just the basics kind of yeah. So, yep. I have 2 kids. I have a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old. The 5-year-old is pretty hyperactive, and I'm learning about that, and it's a daily challenge and learning experience, and feel out of my scope every day, but care about growing into it nonetheless. Yeah. And my husband and I were still technically married, but we separated shortly after, really, well, right around the time that this whole book launched forward. And this book launch was such a bringing this forward. It was so much more than a book. It was really shaking the foundations of my whole soul and being. And so it was a transformational process. And anyway, it's in an amicable place at the time, but working through a tremendous amount of just change. This process has changed every single area of my life. My neighbors would know that I don't know what to do with my yard. I don't know. Yeah, it could use a little TLC. I'm looking at it right now. Yeah, my parents live nearby, which is such a gift. I grew up in this little town, so I run into a lot of old connections, which at first when I moved back here was so overwhelming. It was such a confrontation of my past, and I needed to make a lot of amends because I was a bit sassy in my high school years. And yeah, and the last couple of years, it's been such an interesting polarity in a way. On one hand, it's been the most expansive time in my life by far, hands down. On the other hand, I've just been on that couch behind you so much, just writing away. So I've never been more of a hermit, really, in my whole life, and working on just got very comfortable in the 2020, the permission really that 2020, that COVID times gave to just bow out of social happenings. And there was a level for me that was relieving about that, but it's gone too far. So I'm kind of making commitments to just bring friends back in a more, just to build community, really.
Yes, well, thanks. And
Yeah.
so we are here talking with Chelan Harkin, author of Let Us Dance, most recently, mystical poet from the Pacific Northwest. And we're talking about lots of various things. Thank you for being here, all of you who are. And if you have a question that you want to make sure that I ask, please type it in the chat. I have a few already, and I'm going to get to them in just a minute. I just have a couple of other questions first. So, and one of the things that I like is that you're in each book, you are exploring new themes. In this book, I would say the ones I picked out were the reckless, the feminine, light. You explore light in many ways, and sensitivity. Pick one of those. Doesn't matter to me which one. Pick one of those and talk about it.
Oh, cool. Sensitivity. Yeah. So as a very sensitive person, highly sensitive, for the first 21 or so years of my life, I just didn't know what the hell to do with myself, because I just had so much that I was feeling and perceiving, and intuitive information, kind of keen perception to truth, and to the potential for how people could relate to ourselves and to each other and to this life in such beautiful and satisfying ways, and feeling so much dissonance, and feeling so much just so much pain around malalignment, I suppose I would say, with love and truth and humility, and just disconnect from that. And it was just, oh God, it was there. I just felt so much suffering every day. And then, because I hadn't learned that I could channel that in a potent and powerful and life supporting way, I just repressed basically all of my powers and all of my strengths and my voice and my gifts, and was in a very dysfunctional way until around age 21, found some incredible healing resources that allowed me to move some of the old untrue baggage that I held around shame, around being a deep feeler, and let go of that, or begin the long process of letting go of that bit by bit. It's still with me. I still hold that. It's still hard in a society that has really learned to disconnect from the realm of feelings and devalue it, and kind of call it an inconvenience or a nuisance or what have you. So it's been, but there's just no question for me that it is through honoring my sensitivity and listening to it, which is really, I would describe it most, I think, to be sensitive is to be sensitive to the movement of life force, the guidance of life, the truth of life that move and direct us. And then the more we can hear that, the more sensitive we are to that connection, the more we can follow that, and then the more beautifully our life moves and opens and aligns. And so yeah, I've just really been claiming how powerful that is. But again, it does, within that too, is it has to do with a whole type of redefinition, a re-relating to how we relate to pain, and that we can relate to that. There's a way to relate to it rather than project it or repress it, that can be so unbelievably transformational and life supporting and beautiful. I thought maybe it was a little bit vague, or I don't know, but it's a good start.
I think it was wonderful.
Thanks.
Do you have spiritual practices that are part of your daily or weekly or monthly life, or seasonal?
Yes. Daily, almost all day, every day. And but many wouldn't think of it many wouldn't call this a spiritual practice, but I absolutely do. And it's the practice of feeling the edge of suffering in myself, bringing my consciousness into touch with it, and holding it and listening to it. And often I do pray. I say, and I don't know, prayer for me is an experiment always. I don't claim any certitude that what I'm saying, but it feels good to try. So I say, wise, smartest, wisest, most present, attuned spirit friends, help me move through this and understand this and find the truth within this. And then I bring my consciousness into contact with that place and have this and to stay there and try to let go of judgment about what this energy is. It's just rejected self, I find, is what suffering is. It's rejected energy that actually doesn't need to be rejected because it has incredible information. And in fact, I found that suffering is really just more of ourself wanting to be let in and give its resources and its gifts and its understandings to all of us to be able to use for good. And so I sit with that until it just opens and unfolds, and I receive it. And sometimes I have a big cry, which actually feels like embodied devotion. And then right after that, a poem comes through almost every time. So this is my path, and it's unusual, but I'm happy to just be claiming it and saying it. And I don't know if I've been this direct about that in any interview prior. Yeah, I'm becoming more forward about this, but that's how I operate. It's what I do.
Well, it makes perfect sense, because I can imagine some of these poems coming directly from what you just described.
Wow. Cool. That's so cool. Thank you. Thank you. And it really does feel like it's, our resistance and our rejection of our suffering. It's really just blocking the intelligence of life actually from delivering itself to our consciousness. So that's been my big exploration. And because poetry has been coming so fast and furious these last 2 years, in this way, it's without a doubt, there's such a connection to this process of being open to energetic movement and the connection with that and inspiration continuing to flow. So it's been really fascinating. Yeah.
There are some spiritual poets where I often feel like they're being clever. And there's nothing necessarily wrong with being clever, and it's a gift to be clever, but I don't feel that with your poem. I feel an authenticity. I don't feel someone trying to be clever.
Oh, that means so much. Thank you for recognizing that. Thank you so much. Because this really, my connection with poetry, which I just feel so grateful. I don't know why it happened to me this way. And I don't really claim, I don't know. It's just such a gift, but it's been my main connection point with spirit, or with mystery really, and with joy, and with just feeling so nourished by something that's beyond, connected to and beyond me. And so it just means so much to continually means so much to hear that it resonates with others.
Well, yeah, it does. And so let me then transition and ask the questions of some others which are popping up. And one of them came early in our conversation, and it was simply, what was that first poem of yours, the one that went viral? What was it called?
Oh, sure. That wasn't the first poem of mine, but that was a poem. Should I read it too, do you think?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, I'll read it. It's called The Worst Thing.
Hold up the book so they can see what book it's in.
And this is a book I bought a month in. Daniel Ladinsky wrote the foreword. So the new copies say "Foreword by Daniel Ladinsky." But this is my first book here, Susceptible to Light. And it's all crinkled up and has coffee spilled all over it, as any good book, tends to be. Yeah, I'll read this. The worst thing. The worst thing we ever did was put God in the sky out of reach, pulling the divinity from the leaf, sifting out the holy from our bones, insisting God isn't bursting dazzlement through everything we've made a hard commitment to see as ordinary, stripping the sacred from everywhere to put in a cloud man elsewhere, prying closeness from your heart. The worst thing we ever did was take the dance and the song out of prayer, made it sit up straight and cross its legs, removed it of rejoicing, wiped clean its hip sway, its questions, its ecstatic yowl, its tears. The worst thing we ever did is pretend God isn't the easiest thing in this universe, available to every soul in every breath.
Well, I can see why that went viral.
Thanks, John. It was nuts, because before that, the people who would, my audience was my mom and maybe two of her friends. And then all of a sudden I went to sleep. I posted it and I felt so vulnerable that I was like, post, and I'm out, and I just went to sleep. And I woke up and it was shared, 11,000 times on one page, and I don't know, 20,000 on
I'm
another.
glad that your mom was supportive. I mean, so your mother wasn't saying, aren't you going to go get a real job?
No, she's learned by now that yeah, my track is a bit unusual. But no, she really, as a young child, she would ask me if I wanted to say any prayers from my heart before bed, and oh my God, I would, in some really flourishing language. And sometimes she would write those down, and she still has some of those. So she's always been very supportive.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
All right. We have someone else who wants to know, or probably wants to hear you talk more about what is the connection between therapy and poetry.
Good question. Really good question. Well, for me anyway, that's all I can really speak to. But well, for me, what therapy does is it creates so many of our deep wounds, you could say, just unresolved places. They're from childhood, and so we as kids, we really need the co-regulation of another person to support us in really being able to move through things. And often the reason we have trauma places or stuck energy is because we didn't get that support in really being able to. It's not even entirely that things happened to us, but that then we didn't have the support in moving through those, and so they just got stuck and locked down. And so in therapy, if you have the right type of therapy and the right type of therapist, it's just this fortifying and safe support in being able to safely, as you're ready, go through those and move through those passages, and both discover that we're okay on the other side, and to encounter more of ourselves. I feel that good therapy is really the process of the development of consciousness, or the expansion of consciousness. And it helps us in that process of self, really the question, who am I? It helps us get closer to that. And so, and again, for me, poetry is really it's a mystical, and it's both. It's a mystical and somatic process of opening, and kind of the mystical element, I suppose, is being ready and willing to open, and saying, for me, it's kind of saying those prayers, asking for that support, and also I've just been really dedicated in exploring the possibility that I can continue to find more and more, and I'm just so eager for that. So that's kind of some of those mystical parts, perhaps, and then as these really energy channels open, I found that poetry, for me, as someone who's just built for this, I think, or no, I don't think I am. That's poetry. When there's an open space, the gift of poetry comes through me.
Thanks.
That answered your question.
I am John M. Sweeney. You're here with us on Off the Page, spiritualityandpractice.com's series of conversations with authors. I am here with Chelan Harkin, the author of Let Us Dance, is her most recent book. And I have actually a little Post-it note here to remind me to say to everyone that Chelan's new book will be out in November, and it is called Wild Grace. And it is, you can see it. I don't think you can see it on that one really big bookseller that a lot of people know the name of, but you can see it on the website of Monkfish Publishing, which is in Rhinebeck, New York. They are publishing it in November. So check out monkfishpublishing.com, Wild Grace. That's Chelan's new book that's coming soon. So just a couple more questions, Chelan. One is, why is light so prominent in your poems?
It's a good question. Well, for whatever reason, I was just really born into this world feeling a close connection with, and being able to see Like I see it in you right now, John, you too, Susan. Just see the light in you all, and it's not a light that the opposite isn't, it doesn't have an opposite. There can be that kind of shadow and the thing, polar and light polarity, but no, this is just sort of, there's just, everyone carries this. And for me, it was in connection with this place of light, you could call, or essential self, or this element inside of us that is beyond our conditioning, that has that was the paradigm shift for me, was really reconnecting with that. And so that's what all my poetry is really actually striving to give the reader, is use my words as sort of almost a code to unlock the connection with this in the reader. And one of the ways I do that is through really embracing actually what we've called the shadows, which are just, I think, just kind of rejected or exiled light. And that type of authentic connection with that, it's so important, because as we get closer to that, we become more satisfied, and we don't need our ideological armor, and we don't need, we less and less need all of the other ways that we, all that old conditioning, all those old strategies to keep ourselves distant from our own hearts and each other. And that's really what I care about. I'm just really excited about connection with myself, with others, with everything. And so, so I both really want to affirm this quality in people, and I want to also craft a path back to it.
Well, you have a reader named Amy who wrote in the chat, "I have to scoot and just want to say what a treat to hear you today, Chelan. Poetry is so life-giving and meaningful to me and many who experience it. Thank you for all you do and for who you are."
Oh, thank you, Amy. Thank you so much.
So the title poem of Let Us Dance is a wonderful a short little poem at the back of the book. I found it interesting that it was at the back of the book. And I found it interesting because it's like a benediction. And I actually was thinking you could read it as well. It could almost be like a benediction for all of us.
Beautiful. I'd be so happy to. Let us dance. Your smarts, your talents, your good looks, take off these impediments and let us dance.
May it be so. There also are questions in the chat asking you for more advice about, tips for up and coming writers and self-publishing and things like that. I assume people can probably message you on your Facebook page pretty easily, right?
Absolutely. Yep. Yeah. I love to stay connected with people. So by all means, you can follow me on Facebook, and we can stay in contact and be
do that.
So
it is worth doing. It is worth doing. I can speak from experience that is worth doing with Chelan Harkin. So for being with us, is there any sort of final thing that I should have asked that you need to say before we go?
Oh, good question. Can I just tell a mini story about the title for this book?
Please.
This was really this sort of, mystical mystical in the sense of kind of the unexplainable, and in a way, connection that I had that gave me the title for this book. I was in Israel on a pilgrimage experience to the Baha'i World Center. I grew up in the Baha'i faith and was in the prison cell of the founder of the Baha'i faith. And I closed my eyes for what felt like 10 seconds, and the whole group that I was with had left, and the door had closed, and I was just in this prison cell by myself. And I was in a really hard time of there being a lot about my upbringing in that faith that had served me so much, and a lot that I needed to let go of, and all of that whole journey. And I was just really confused about how to relate to God. And I deeply wanted an authentic relationship with myself and with God, and wasn't sure if that was okay or not. And in this moment of being alone in this prison cell in Israel at age 21, I was filled with this energy, this enlivening, vibrating, unlocking energy. It said, "Let us dance." And it was almost like my whole being was vibrating with this message. And it was so clearly interpreted to me to be this message from whatever, God, or whatever you want to call it. It's telling us to bring our whole selves forward, and a dance is such a dynamic thing, and we step on each other's toes, and we don't get the moves right, and sometimes we have the most unbelievable whirls. So that really just transformed my whole relationship, gave me permission to begin really moving forward in a new way. And I knew that one day I would have a book of poetry called Let Us Dance the Stumble, Whirl with the Beloved. And it was as soon as I got home from that trip that poetry started pouring through me as it does now. And so it's just I'm happy to tell that story. It kind of honors the history of this book. And it's just such a beautiful thing now, 13 years later, to be holding this and sharing that.
Oh, that's great. And I can tell from two things that you've said in this interview that age 21 was this pivotal time.
It sure was. Oh my God. Yes.
Well, I'm glad you've come on this side of what was happening inside of you there, because you are helping many. You are opening up these things for many of us.
I couldn't be more delighted. I couldn't be more happy about that. Thank you, John. Thank you so much.
So thank you, Chelan, and thank you to everybody for being with us. And keep in touch with Chelan Harkin on Facebook, and make sure that you check out Let Us Dance and take a look at her forthcoming book, Wild Grace, which comes out in November. So good afternoon. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you all. Thank you so much.